Right off the bat, so I've been a collector my whole life. I collected the vintage figures, I collected pretty much everything. And if you actually go back into my older videos, you'll see I'm in my garage sometimes in just like gym shorts, just like opening up the box. I'm like, look, here's what's supposed to come in it, right? I would always ask my parents to, rent the movies in English with subtitles, and I would memorize the lines, even though I didn't know what they meant, right? Like I didn't know what they said, but I would memorize them so I could play with my toys and I would repeat the lines. And so that was kind of my first introduction to almost like American culture.
Hey guys, it's Jedi Lex, and welcome to another episode of Beyond Tatooine, where I bring on different collectors to talk about how their love of Star Wars originated, as well as take a look at and chat about their collections. And on today's episode, we have a very special guest. In my opinion, he has probably one of the most well-known collections in the Star Wars community. Please help me welcome Gabe from Gabe's Empire, formerly known as Star Wars Replicas. How you
There you
doing?
go. Hey, Lex, thank you so much for inviting me. I'm really excited to get to chat and, kind of get to know each other.
Yes, I mean we've run into each other like twice, I think, MegaCon and then at Celebration. But
Yeah.
I'm very excited to have you on. I know we've been trying to plan this, but it's come to fruition, and I'm super excited to chat with you.
Yeah, no, no, thank you again for the invite. And yeah, I'm always up for a good chat about Star Wars, anything, right? Collectibles,
Yeah,
anything. So
absolutely. I guess we can start off with what kind of how did your channel start, and then what kind of inspired the name change recently?
yeah. So right off the bat, so I've been a collector my whole life. I collected the vintage figures, I collected pretty much everything. And it wasn't until about 2005-ish where I started collecting the life size stuff, right? So it's been about 20 years now. And probably I'd say I never had like a collection space, right? I would always just kind of put my stuff randomly around the house. And then I started getting a lot of the helmets, the Novos helmets. And around that time, there's really no channels kind of dedicated to the high end life size, Star Wars replicas. And so a lot of the times it was more about finding information about like the old master replicas, right? Master replicas went out of business around that time. So, I was still kind of doing my collection, starting collecting a lot of the lightsabers. And sometimes you didn't know what was supposed to be inside the boxes, right? So I came up with the idea. I was like, oh, maybe I should just, as I'm getting these pieces, I should just unbox them to show collectors what's supposed to be inside the box, just in case they get something on the secondary market. So I started filming. My first video on YouTube was the prop shop Kylo Ren lightsaber, which was it. It was crazy because that video kind of became infamous because it arrived defective, and it was like the purple. It came out purple. So it became this whole thing around the community because around that time it was the first time that a new licensed prop company had gotten the Lucasfilm license. So, anyways, that's kind of what launched my YouTube channel, and it was Star Wars replicas. It still is, and I don't intend to change it on YouTube just because that's been kind of what I focus on and what I've been doing. So that's kind of what started it. And it was more of informational for other collectors to know. So it wasn't really about necessarily the pieces, but it was more about the contents inside the box. And if you actually go back into my older videos, you'll see I'm in my garage sometimes in just like gym shorts, just like opening up the box. I'm like, look, here's what's supposed to come in it, right? So yeah, so that's kind of what started. And I did YouTube for years, and I never really got into like Instagram or TikTok or anything like that. TikTok didn't exist. And it wasn't until about the shutdown when I started posting a little bit more like on Instagram, and then TikTok obviously came about, right? And at that time, again, I was just focusing on YouTube. That was my main platform. And all of a sudden on TikTok, I posted one video of just like my collection room. It was like an opening shot of my collection room, and it kind of went viral. And all of a sudden, just all my videos just started going viral as I was posting them. So I started focusing on TikTok, right? Because that's where I was getting a lot of views, a lot of followers. And, as it started growing, it was like 10,000 followers, then 100,000 followers, then 200 followers, then it's like 500,000 followers. And I'm just like, wait, what's going on? Like, this is wild. At the same time, my Instagram also started growing, right? And that was Star Wars replicas across the board. It was all on all my platforms. And I was always hesitant about TikTok and Instagram because of their their IP regulations, right? Number one, the word replicas is a forbidden word on TikTok. I don't know if anybody knows that, but if you try to search something replicas, it immediately flags it, right? I didn't know that, and that was like maybe in the last year or so. So that was kind of my first concern. I was like, oh man, like my account's gonna get flagged. I have 500,000 followers. I don't want to lose it, right? So I already started thinking about changing it. And then, even on Instagram, I was kind of hesitant. And also because I use the word Star Wars in it, right? Um, and although I have like a very good relationship with Lucasfilm and a lot of their partner brands, I was always just very hesitant about I gotta I gotta play by the rules. I gotta gotta curate my content very well because I'm using their IP in my handle. So a couple weeks ago, about 2 weeks ago, I decided that it was finally time for a change on TikTok and Instagram. Just again, peace of mind. So I changed it to Gabe's Empire. And which is kind of cool because it allows me to still focus on Star Wars. It's still obviously the Empire, right? So it's still Star Wars focused, but I also collect Back to the Future stuff, James Bond stuff. I have
Mm,
screen use props from like a bunch of other franchises, Hunger Games, all the Tarantino films. So I have a lot of other stuff that I collect that I always wanted to kind of show, but it was kind of hard because I was in that Star Wars little
a
box.
niche.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Okay.
but yeah,
Gotcha. I
so
didn't know
that's
you
kind of
did.
where that's where it came about, and
Interesting.
no,
Okay, well, I like Gabe's Empire, and you have kind of, I feel like, built an empire. I think a lot of us know of you, your collection. We look up to you. I think a lot of people try to model their collections after what you've created, and honestly, you have such an impressive collection.
I
So
appreciate
it's
that.
it's awesome.
Thank you. Yeah, that's it's always such a compliment, honestly. Like when I see other collectors kind of doing the whole Besta thing with the light.
Hmm.
And I always, people are always asking me, and I was like, just go on my YouTube channel. I have like literally a whole video just showing you exactly what I use, the lights, the cabinets, and everything. I'm like, re, you know, copy it. I don't care. It's all about the community, right?
Absolutely. And I guess we'll start with my, maybe my first question is, what was kind of your introduction to Star Wars, and what made you really fall in love with this franchise?
Oh, yeah, that's a great one. So my Star Wars story obviously goes back to my childhood, right? I was born in between Empire and Jedi. So my first kind of introduction to Star Wars was Return of the Jedi. It was around that time, all the toys were still, really popular and all that. And but I'm from Mexico. I was born in Mexico, so I only spoke Spanish. So all the movies we'd watch, there would always be either in Spanish, dubbed, or in English, but dubbed in Spanish, or with the subtitles. So I would always ask my parents to rent the movies in English with subtitles, and I would memorize the lines, even though I didn't know what they meant, right? Like I didn't know what they said, but I would memorize them so I could play with my toys, and I would repeat the lines. And so that was kind of my first introduction to almost like American culture, right? So finally, when I migrated to the United States, it was you know my passion. It was still, Star Wars was kind of my gateway, like I said, into American culture. And again, that just kind of started my love for Star Wars. And I've always had kind of a close relationship with it, especially around like during the 90s when there was that kind of dead period, right? Where there was like no Star Wars. All the Star Wars fans kind of almost went into like the closet because it was like such a nerdy thing to like Star Wars and all that. And So yeah, so there was the dark times there where, I kind of stepped back. I sold all my old vintage stuff to get wrestling tickets back then, so I could go to a WWF match. Um, so, and it wasn't again until about 2005 when I kind of restarted collecting these. Actually, no, you know what? I started collecting the Power of the Force, the orange
Mm,
backs and like, the
yep.
green backs like that came out in probably like mid 90s, something like that. But yeah,
Gotcha. Wow. So you've been collecting for quite a long time. I feel like a lot of the people I've interviewed and stuff like that kind of, I mean, I know for me personally and a few
mhm,
others that I've interviewed, we kind of got back into collecting, trying to reacquire some of the things that we had when we were younger, but during COVID. I
yeah,
think COVID was a huge boom for Star Wars collecting in the community. And, we were getting content from Star Wars and Lucasfilm and all that kind of stuff. And, I think that's pretty cool that you've been collecting for quite a while because I feel like a lot of the people I've interviewed have really only been within the last 5 years or so, like
yeah,
2019, 2020,
yeah.
or so.
Well, actually, let me actually tell you, and I don't know if a lot of people, I mean, the people that were in the community obviously know, but around 2020, there was a big boom of Star Wars collecting communities that were just popping up. Um, I One of the first ones that I remember is Rogue One 6, right? Those guys on that channel. They started talking about hot toys and collectibles and stuff like that. And I would go on their channel and we'd talk collectibles. That was around the time where Real Robot started kind of launching their stuff again. Um, and from there, we started a channel called Collection Wars. And
Mm.
so it became its own little community there. So there's the Rogue One 6 community, and Collection Wars kind of grew this community. Out of that community came Spice Runners Lounge. So there was a lot of communities that were kind of popping up. And along with that, along the YouTube communities, were also like the Facebook communities that all of a sudden started popping up. The cargo hold was another big one, but they had been around for a while. Obviously, the hyperdrive, right? Like, so a lot of these communities around that time really started focusing on kind of the high end collectibles, and you know whether it's myself or all these other collectors that were talking about these high end products. I think we kind of started getting people, giving them a little bit of FOMO there, because a lot of this stuff, like master replicas, was kind of long gone, right? Like you could only get them on eBay and stuff like that. So I think it kind of almost forced people to start catching up, right, to the collections, especially for the high end stuff, right? Like the life size prop replicas and stuff like that. Yeah, there was a big boom of those communities during the COVID era. So
Yeah, COVID brought out, I think, a lot of positives. I think it brought a lot of people back to Star Wars. I mean, sure most of us have
yeah,
been lifelong fans. It's always been there, but I think, COVID, while it wasn't such a positive thing, it really brought a lot of people back to Star Wars, which I do think is positive. And it kind of really, the community just boomed and it's been blossoming ever since. And it's been cool to kind of be a part of that growth.
yeah,
So I haven't been in the game as long as you have. I did start around like COVID. I think it was
yeah.
like 2019, 2020. And
Mhm.
then I didn't start on YouTube or anything, I think until like 2022, like the end, maybe beginning of 23. So it's been cool to kind of, watch the progression from the shadows and then kind of join in and, build the network, talk to other collectors. And it's always fascinating to kind of hear people's stories. But a lot of people are like, yeah, COVID hit. And I was like, yeah, I've just started ordering stuff. It was
Yeah,
easy. Amazon was delivering and I was ordering and it was coming. And I was like, yeah, I
yeah,
pretty much same here. I would order Lego sets, just build a set. Next day, I would order another one. Like it was
yeah,
such a bad addiction, but it
yeah,
brought me back into collecting. So I
yeah.
love that.
No, and I love like the fact, like like your podcast, your YouTube channel, Will, and like there's a lot of the channels that popped up are probably around that same time, right? 2022, 22, kind of like the newer. I almost see you guys as this new generation. Even though it's not necessarily a new generation, but going from that YouTube community space, like I said, of those channels and those networks, and then seeing you guys where you're a lot more passionate, I think a lot more passionate about kind of Star Wars in general, right? As opposed to, I think, some of the communities that that popped up early on were really focused around original trilogy stuff, Mandalorian, right?
Hmm.
I really appreciate that you guys kind of focus on Star Wars as a whole, right? And are a little more positive, I think, than than we were, in the early stages of COVID. So
Yeah, I think a lot of us try to be, receptive and open minded. Granted, not everything that comes out is the best, but you got to give it a chance and then you can make your decision. And I think that's what a lot of us, are trying to do. But there is a lot of negativity out there, which makes it a little tough, but kind of just got to push forward. And if you love it, you love it. If you don't, you don't. And you call it a day.
yeah,
You
absolutely, yeah.
know?
So
But you did mention, so Return of the Jedi was kind of your introduction. Would that happen to be your favorite movie? Or do you prefer
it
it is?
is.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, Rogue One is up there, and
Yeah.
there's time like there's days where I'm like, Rogue One is probably my favorite one. But at the end of the day, I mean, Return of the Jedi is what I grew up on. That's you know, it's like comfort. It's my comfort movie. So
Yeah.
yeah,
That's kind of a trend I've noticed is usually the first movie you're introduced to is most likely the one that you kind of resonate with and is your favorite. Is it the best? That's another conversation that someone brought up. It was like, "Are you asking my favorite or what I think's the best?" And I was like, "It could be both. It could be two
yeah,
separate, but whatever you prefer. But usually the first one that you're introduced to is kind of the one that is your favorite. May not be the best, but
yeah,
some people separate it out. Some people like to keep it together. But I've
yeah.
I've noticed that trend. So
Yeah.
interesting.
And that's fine. Yeah, it's not like, like I said, Rogue One's probably like you said, like the favorite versus, kind of like my number one. Just because that movie I could sit there and watch like over and over again and like I won't get tired of it. The original trilogy, the prequels, like there's only so many times you can watch them until you're like, all right, like, you know.
Yeah. Yep. And then I guess kind of following that train then, would Luke be your favorite character? If you're a big Return of the Jedi guy.
Funny enough, no, my favorite character is
Oh,
Tarkin.
really?
Yeah, I got them
Int-
tattooed right here on my arm.
Wow.
Yeah,
That is so cool. You're the first person I think that I've had on that has said Tarkin is their
Tarkin.
favorite.
Yeah,
Interesting.
Tarkin, and for different reasons, I think than most people. Like not necessarily because of the lore, but
Hmm.
more because of the actor. Peter Cushing, absolutely fantastic. He was really into horror films too, and I love horror films. The old Hammer films, him, Christopher Lee, and Vincent Price. There a lot of them were in those old Hammer, and they're like B movies. They were kind of low budgety movies, but I also grew up on those. So again, knowing that like Tarkin is also like in all these other horror films was really cool. And but then Tarkin's also badass because early on I realized like even as a kid I'm like, all right, so like who's the main bad guy in Star Wars, right? And obviously later we know the Emperor is, and you got to remember, like watching the original trilogy. But I was like, no, you know what? Tarkin, from in my head, Tarkin was Vader's boss, and he checks him, right? In A New Hope, multiple
Sure
times, like
does.
Vader, release him. It's like as you wish, right? And like he's tough on Vader. So, as a lot of people are like, "Oh, Darth Vader, he's like the best." So, whatever. I was like, "Dude, Tarkin checks him like hard." So, that was always cool.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, you make valid points. I never really thought about it that way because usually everyone thinks like, "Oh, Vader, Palpatine," but you do bring up a solid point. Tarkin definitely checks him a few times
Yeah,
actually, and puts him in his place a little bit, which is crazy
yeah,
considering Darth Vader could literally just choke him out at any second. But like, he doesn't because he
right.
respects him and kind of that hierarchy is very set into place. So
Yeah,
interesting. Interesting.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So Tarkin, there you go.
Yeah. And I guess my last question before we take a look at your collection and talk
Yep.
about some other things is what is your favorite show? Could be animated,
Mm.
live action, maybe you got one of both. What are your
No,
thoughts?
I got to go with Andor. I mean, that I absolutely amazing show, and I'm sure you've talked about it plenty of times on on the show. But yeah, no, Andor, 100%. There's not even I don't think there's even a show in my mind that even gets close. gets close to it. Maybe Mando season 1 ish, but no, no way. Andor for sure.
Interesting. I know it's not everyone's cup of tea and it's a different type of Star Wars, but it
Yeah.
still feels like Star Wars. You're just not having the lightsabers and all the craziness that's happening, but it's
Mhm.
very much Star Wars and I like that. It's a slow burn and I did feel that with season 2. I felt like we had the first arc, then the second, and each one kind of built and built and built, and then those last really 6 episodes for me sold it. Like they totally stuck the landing. That final episode, that final scene, like it was masterclass. Like it was insane.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, for me, it's all about filling in the holes, right? Like I said,
Yeah.
growing up on the original trilogy, there's always all these like gaps and the lore right behind the movies. In fact, even there's back in the '80s, there's always this rumor about like, oh, like how did Darth Vader become Darth Vader? And then there's always this chat, and I don't really know where it even originated from because obviously George Lucas hadn't even thought about the prequels necessarily back then. But everyone would be like, "Oh, Obi-Wan and him got into a fight, and he threw him into lava, like into a volcano or something." And I always remember that as a kid. I was like, "Oh yeah, there's a battle with Obi-Wan and Darth Vader." So I wasn't the biggest fan of the prequels because I was already an adult. I was probably 18, 20, and 22 or whatever, something like that when they came out. So I definitely was one of those kind of toxic fans, right? But not necessarily because of the lore or like, oh, like, because obviously it was George Lucas. But around that time, there was a lot of hatred for George Lucas because he had just done like the special editions, and for original trilogy fans, that was like, what? Like you change who shot first? What? Like you added, Jabba the Hutt in this scene that looks all like, CGI. So there's a lot of things that like people would say like, oh, you ruined my childhood, right? Because you changed it. So then when the prequels came out, my expectations were like up here. And then I watched episode 1 and I was like, oh, like what? I did not like that. Because again, I don't think I was the target demographic, right? George Lucas had admitted the 10-year-olds were the target demographic. So I walked out of there like, that was horrible. And I watched it probably like at least 20 times because I worked at a movie theater at that time. So I would just keep on watching it. And I was like, there's something I'm missing. Like, how come I don't like it? It's Star Wars. And then episode 2 came out, and I was like, this one might even be worse than the first one. Like, and again, I was one of those toxic fans. But then episode 3 came out, and I was like, oh, this is good. This is I like this. And it was more about filling in those gaps that I had as a kid, right? All of a sudden, you see the battle of Obi-Wan and Anakin. You learn kind of where C3PO came from, R2D2. You learn, just kind of how the twins were made, right? And things like that. A lot of like fillers that I appreciated. So again, going back to Andor, for me, it's a huge filler, right? Because it's like, oh, okay, now we're getting this backstory of how the rebellion started, leading up to Rogue One and then leading up to Episode 4. So as an original trilogy kind of fan, to me that's like awesome because it added so much depth to the original trilogy.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. And I wish they would do more of that, like kind of filling in the blanks, because I feel like there's so much in between the movies
Yeah,
and stuff like that, in between the prequels and, OT, in between
yeah,
OT and the sequels. Like there's so much that they can do. And I want to
yeah.
see more of that if they do it the way that they did Andor. Because I
Right.
think, it was pivotal to see how the rebellion started,
Yeah,
really how we got the plans. Like I think that was a big one. And then
yeah,
you jump into A New Hope and there you go, she's got the plans. But
right.
we didn't know that.
Yeah,
We kind of just figured she got it somehow, but like
yeah,
you added so much depth and a really tragic story of how she got those plans. And I think they just did a really good job with that. And, maybe it doesn't even have to be in the style of Andor, but just like the writing and how they kind of went about it. I would love to see more of that, filling in the
absolutely.
blanks.
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, that's what, like I said right now before that I wasn't the biggest prequel fan. I became a prequel fan around 2020. And the reason why was because of Clone Wars. Clone Wars filled in those gaps that I kind of needed, right? The Darth Maul, like we learn more about Darth Maul and what happened. You get to really know these characters from the prequels, and it gave it Ahsoka. I mean, I absolutely love Ahsoka now. So like, it was one of those like things that kind of led me, yeah, again, as an original trilogy fan, the Clone Wars, I hadn't watched until, like I said, the shutdown. So we sat and binge watched it, and again, it just opened up my eyes to the prequels and like, oh, like that makes more sense. So now I appreciate the prequels now because I have all this kind of background to, to the characters. So yeah, no, I think filling in those gaps is absolutely necessary. But also, like Skeleton Crew, also kind of showing these extra stories kind of off to the side, I think also make great TV. So
Yeah, I enjoyed Skeleton Crew. I thought it was just fun. Like, it was fun Star Wars and
yeah,
it felt very in the universe. Like, it was so good. And I
yeah.
guess that kind of can lead into our conversation, some of your pictures, because I believe you went to the Skeleton Crew premiere,
I
possibly.
I did.
Where is
Yeah,
it? That one.
one
There it
back.
is.
Yeah. Yeah, off to the side. Yep. Yeah, so it's really cool that, in the last couple years, like I said, I've you know, worked with Lucasfilm as far as like promoting certain things, and I've been super lucky and super fortunate just to get invited to some of these premieres. And yeah, the first one I got invited to was the Acolyte, and that was great. That was like my first red carpet premiere, super cool. And then Skeleton Crew was amazing because it was at Disneyland, and that was huge because I I mean I had gone by then. I had gone to that one, to the Lego Star Wars red carpet, and then when I finally went to this one, I was just like, man, at Disneyland with the Falcon, and it was just such a cool experience. All the actors were there. Everyone was there. I got to meet Bryce Dallas Howard. She was there, and yeah, here you go. That was super fun. She was honestly the nicest person. Like she just sat there and started having a conversation. We found out as we're talking that we're only like a week apart in birthdays. Like
Wow.
like literally like same age, same year, same month, and then we're only a couple weeks apart, I think. And she was like, oh my god, and she like turns to my wife and she's like, did you hear that? Like we're only like a couple weeks apart, and my wife's not a Star Wars fan really. Like she's just like, oh, that's weird, and then she just starts cracking up. Again, the nicest person. And then we saw her again, kind of walking around Disneyland. And I was like, man, I should have showed her my collection. I think she would have appreciated because we were talking about like growing up in the 80s and like all these, just the collectibles and the shows and stuff. And so then my wife's like, Miss Howard, remember my husband, the one that your birthday is nearby? He wants to show you something on his phone. I was like, dude, that made it sound
Whoa.
super creepy. But she was super good. She's like, oh yeah, what are you gonna show me? I'm like, oh, it's my collection room. And then she looks at my wife. She's like, this is in your house? And my wife's like, yeah, unfortunately. And she cracks up. But yeah, no, she was the nicest person. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, that event was super fun.
So what is it like when you go to these events?
Yeah.
Like, I mean, I see you kind of post some stuff. Obviously,
Yeah.
some of it you can't record, things like that. But like, what is it like going to these premieres and these, previews per
Yeah.
se?
I mean, number one, I feel like extremely like just fortunate to be invited, right? And it's a little intimidating because no matter how many you've gone to, it's like it always feels like almost out of place, right? Like you're like, wait a second, like what am I doing here? Like I'm not like a select, I'm a collector. You know what I mean? Like I collect stuff. Like what am I doing? How did I get invited to these things? Right. So it's always interesting. You go and you check in, they have your name, they pull out the envelope, they'll give you your credentials. and then you go through either the red carpet. Sometimes they'll have like the red carpet with all the photographers like that, like you see on the right there. Um, so there's photographers and they take pictures of you and they have your name on a little piece of paper. And then yeah, you just kind of walk through the red carpet, and then usually either at the end of the red carpet or sometimes during, they have like a whole section of like people just kind of hanging out, right? There's like drinks and there's like, little snacks, and people just kind of gather around, and you see all any other like creator friends. That's usually the first people I look for. I'm like, oh, what other creators are here? And get to chat with them for a little while and take pictures, make content. But yeah, and then usually you go in and they show you some type of, right, either for, in my situation, the ones that I've gone to, they'll show you like a couple of episodes of, you know of whatever the show. For Rebuild the Galaxy, they showed us the entire season. So that one was kind of cool. That was a long one. As opposed to Andor, they only showed us like a 15-minute clip of the intro scene where he's trying to steal the tie. So that's really, but then they had like a Q&A afterwards. So that was really cool because then the whole cast got up on stage and like did this whole, kind of presentation. So yeah, they're a little different all the time, but yeah, super fun. And sometimes there's events like the one you see where I'm with Luke. That one was a Disney event, like a Disney Parks event, and they invited us to like a creator preview, like a preview day for Seasons of the Force. That one was really cool because we got to kind of go backstage at Galaxy's Edge, which never really been back there. And they have like this whole section behind the Falcon, and it looks like big containers, like the big shipping containers, but they're all painted in like Star Wars like theme. Like it was really cool to kind of just go backstage and see all the upcoming merch and stuff like that.
That's cool. And I'm glad that you have been invited to these and get to experience them and like share your experiences because they always seem very positive. You get to meet a lot of, you get to see not only the content, but meet a lot of the people that were involved in producing that. And
Yeah.
it seems like for the most part, I mean, I feel like the majority of the time, a lot of them are very like personable. You can go up and talk to them, have conversations, ask them questions and stuff like that, get pictures. Some maybe a little bit more talkative than others, but I think it's really cool that, through your collection, you've been able to kind of grow so much that you're now kind of getting to be invited to these events. And I can understand the imposter syndrome, but I think it's very well deserved. And I'm glad that you have been invited and go to these events.
Oh, I appreciate that. Thank you. Yeah, like I said, for with collecting, it's just one of those things, right? Like there's a lot of us out there, right? A lot of collectors out there. But like, I mean, usually when I'm walking there, I'm like, I almost feel like I'm competing with like some of these, younger, content creators that do like cosplay and stuff like that. Not necessarily competing, but like I'm in that same space, but totally different content. So, like I said, sometimes I do feel out of place because I'm not in cosplay and I'm not, it's a different, almost Star Wars community, when they do the cosplay. So it's just always interesting to, you know, when I get invited to these things to experience that.
Yeah. And speaking of being invited to things, were you invited to Celebration or was that kind of just you decided to go to?
A little bit of both. So I had already planned, like as soon as Celebration got announced, I was like, I'm on it. Like I got to get my tickets. And this, obviously was in Japan. So, I told my wife, I was like, hey, like celebrations in Japan, it's like in a year, I was like, we have to go. And what we do is like, let's make a family trip out of it. Right. So I got all the passes for everybody and we started planning a family vacation. So it was going to be like 2 weeks where we'd go to Disney, we would, explore Tokyo and Japan and all that stuff. And the kids were old enough where they would appreciate it. So that was the whole plan all along. And then maybe about, I want to say like 5 months before, a few months before, I was reached out by ILM and MetaQuest. and they wanted to sponsor my trip. So, so they did. So they ended up technically sponsoring like me personally, like my flight. They were gonna do my hotel, my food, basically sponsor the whole thing. The problem is that I had already booked the hotel with my family, so it was like logistically it was hard. But they still ended up again sponsoring like my flight, and they gave me like an exhibitor badge, and it was really cool. I got to go in early to do some of the the VR experience, and that was super cool that that they reached out and I got to experience that.
So how many, I mean, this was my first celebration. I wasn't able to go last year. Or was it last year? The one that was in
Yeah.
London. I wasn't able to go to that one, but this was my first one. How many celebrations have you been to?
I've actually only been to 3 celebrations.
Okay.
So, yeah, Anaheim 2016, Anaheim 2022, right? It was supposed to be the 2021, and then this one. So, it was I didn't start traveling out of like my city to go to conventions, probably until maybe 2, 3 years ago. Because I'm in San Diego, so San Diego Comic Con was always here. So, to me that was like the peak convention, right? That was like the one that I went every single year. But it wasn't until maybe 2015, 2016, somewhere around there, that I started going to LA to some of their conventions. So yeah, I missed out on like the Florida one, the one in Chicago, just because I wasn't really traveling out, to go to conventions.
Gotcha. Yeah, I this is really the first year that I'm starting to travel and go out to places. I mean, Japan, I'm going to Rebel Scum, but I mean, I'm in Florida, so I really, MegaCon's like our
Yeah,
big mech essentially, and it's a
yeah.
big con, so I have
Yeah.
no qualms about that. But I mean, I'll travel up and down Florida, but I've
Mhm.
never really, gone outside of Florida to go to cons. So
Yeah.
Japan was really a big one for me. And then I was like, a lot of us while we were at Japan were like, we have to do this more often. Like we got to meet
Yeah.
up, we got to go to these cons, we got to do stuff. And they were like, we should all go to Rebel Scum. And I
Yeah.
was like, all right, I'm in. So now
Yeah.
I'm going to Texas. So this is really the first year that I'm starting to travel to go to more cons. But I mean, honestly, I feel like Florida's a pretty good spot to be. Florida and LA and New
Yeah.
York, I think, as well, because we get a lot of cons. So you don't really have to go many places outside of your state. But
Right.
I think it's fun to go, you get to not only travel to other states and even out of the country,
Mhm.
but you get to go to cons and see other people and do some
Yeah.
fun stuff. So it's been very exciting. Japan was phenomenal. I'm so glad that I did it. I
Yeah.
am going to try to get tickets. I feel like it's going to be very difficult to get tickets for LA. I think having it come back to the States is going to be a
Yeah.
thing.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, I've yet to get some of the Jedi passes, and I'm like, that's what I want, I wanna get some of those Jedi passes, or hopefully this next year, like, I mean, or not next year, 2 years, right?
Mhm.
Um, I we'll see. We'll see what happens, and maybe there's a different opportunity to do something else with with Star Wars and Lucasfilm. But yeah, no, I'm kind of the same as you. Like I wasn't really traveling outside of California, but Rebel ScumCon was one of the first also that I traveled out, um, and MegaCon. Actually, speaking of MegaCon, I've gone 2 years in a row. Just that convention's great. Part of it is also I don't want to say pressure, but like I I'll apply for like press passes just to just to apply, and then all of a sudden they'll approve it, and I'm like, well, now I gotta go. There's no backing out. I gotta go.
Yep. I mean, I applied for Rebel Scum. I got the press pass, and I was like, all right, I got to lock it in. Like, I got to buy the plane ticket. I
Gotta
actually
go.
have to do this now. So,
Yeah,
I'm excited about it. A lot of us have kind of finalized things, and
yeah,
I'm excited to go and check it out. I know it's only, its second year, but it looks like such a promising convention. And I know we were kind of talking about it a little
yeah,
bit prior, but
yeah.
I think it's very exciting. And aside from Rebel Scum, I know that's in August. Are there any
Mhm.
other cons or things that you're planning on attending? The
Yeah,
rest of I think we got what 6 months. We're already halfway through this year,
I
so the
know.
rest of your plans for 2025.
Yeah, I'll be at San Diego Comic Con next month, and I'll be there Wednesday through Sunday. And then the one after that is Rebel Scum Con. I'll be there. And then after that, I think it's just LA Comic Con. I can't really think of any other ones that I think that's it for the rest of the year. I think those, or at least planned, right? Those are the three that I have kind of
Gotcha.
planned
So a
ahead.
lot of the bigger cons
Yeah.
you go to. I saw you had a picture. Let me see if I can find it. Oh,
Oh,
there
yeah,
it is
WonderCon.
for WonderCon. That was this year, right? Earlier in this year.
Yeah, yeah. WonderCon's one of my favorites too. WonderCon actually was, and again because it's so close, it's in Anaheim, and we're always at Disney, all the time. WonderCon actually has become one of my favorites because of the community, right? It's a big cosplaying convention. So
Hmm.
it's super cool because I always get to see, all our friends, they're all there cosplaying. And actually WonderCon's the one that introduced me to the R2 Builders Club, which,
Oh,
yeah, that was like 2000, I want to say 15. I like walked by the R2 Builders Club like section. I was like, wait, you could build a life-size R2? So then I went to work. I started, researching and doing all that. And yeah, I built my own R2, thanks to the Builders Club. So I always have a special WonderCon has a special place in my heart every year.
gotcha. That's a cool one. And now that I've started like branching out of Florida, I think I would like to try to go to that one because I see a lot of people go to that. It seems, as you were saying, big on the cosplay, and I
Mhm.
really enjoy seeing the effort and stuff
Yeah,
that people put into it, even the creativity
yeah,
behind some of the ones that they do and the mashups
yeah,
between certain fandoms. Like, getting to even see that in Japan was really cool.
yeah,
Like seeing the culture of, the host country kind of incorporated more into Star Wars.
yeah,
I thought that was so cool too. So I love cosplay. I don't know that I'll ever venture out myself to
yeah,
do it, but I like, seeing other people do it and I admire the effort that it takes.
yeah.
So WonderCon is definitely on my list for sure.
Yeah, I'm kind of the same way. It's like I don't think I'll ever cosplay myself, but I love like that community. I love like the passion they have. LA Comic Con's another big one for cosplay. That one's There's a
Interesting.
huge turnout for Star Wars cosplay specifically. So if you get a chance, LA Comic Con's another good one.
Okay, I will put that on the list. I don't know about maybe maybe we'll see we'll see. But I want to go to some of these bigger cons, but
Yeah,
I think I gotta take it in strides, kind
yeah,
of
of
thing.
course.
We'll see. And then on the right, what do we have there? That looks like a massive falcon.
Yeah, yeah. So that's getting into a little bit of my collection there. Yeah, so that's the studio scale master replicas Falcon and AT-AT. And yeah, I mean, basically, these are, you know, replicas of the models that they used for filming. And yeah, they're obviously, actually, I use that Falcon as kind of my showcase, like whenever I do reviews of stuff, I'll usually
Mhm.
put stuff on top of that. It just gives good lighting. It, like, somehow
Yep.
bounces the lights back up really good. So but yeah, those are kind of my some of my bigger pieces that I have in my collection.
They look massive, and it looks like you have an autograph, maybe on from both of them. Who
Yeah.
are the autographs from?
Yeah, on the bottom, it's a that one's a signature edition. It's the Phil Tippett signature edition. So the one with the snow speeder that has Phil Tippett, and on top, that's actually, so the Master Replicas came out with two different versions: a limited edition and then a signature edition. Signature edition had Harrison Ford's autograph on it. I never got it. It was The Falcon's one of those ones that it's hard to get, especially because you almost have to get it locally because this box is massive. So shipping itself is like several $100s. So mine's the limited edition, but maybe last year, 2 years ago, one of the autograph companies did a send in for Harrison Ford. So I made a plaque and sent that in because, you need Harrison Ford's autograph on the Falcon.
Of course. Yeah, he's a hard one to kind of come by
Yeah.
lately,
Yeah.
unfortunately. I
And he's
mean,
and he's getting up there in age too. So, you know,
Him and Hamill, it's
Yeah,
crazy. So
yeah,
very very hard to come by. It seems like Hamill's kind of venturing out a little bit more, but
yeah,
not as much when it comes to Harrison. So
yeah,
and that's kind of like an overview of your whole collection. Can kind of see that R2 right there.
yeah. That's the
So
one I built. Yeah. So
that's pretty.
so yeah, most of my collection, I focus on licensed prop replicas. That's kind of just because that's all that there really was back in those days. I mean, yeah, there was fan made stuff, but it wasn't really that good. Um, there's a couple pieces that were okay when I first started, but I focused on the licensed stuff because at that time it was still master replicas. It was still kind of the golden age of that master replica, um, you know, collection kind of still coming out. And then they lost the license and it went to EFX collectibles. So I immediately just transferred. I started buying all the EFX collectibles stuff. And then all the helmets that you see there are either master replicas, EFX collectibles, and then later came another company called Anovos. And Anovos was also had the license from Lucasfilm, and they would actually go into the archives and digitally scan some of the helmets. So I started buying a bunch of those. Then they went out of business. Now it's the new Novo that has the license. But again, for me, it's more about kind of that attachment to the archives. Like I want that lineage, and that's really what kind of draws me to collecting and some of these pieces is that every single piece I want there to be some type of connection to the original films, right? Whether it's digitally scanned or the original molds or even just like a little piece of like the helmet that's like a found part, right, that they used in filming. Yeah, that's really what I want to focus on, and it's kept me kind of in check as far as collecting because I'm sure, as you know, you're a collector yourself, it could get out of hand, right? If you start collecting everything, all of a sudden the room becomes kind of like it is right now, actually, just full of just bunch of stuff. There's nowhere to put it. So I've been relatively good about, sticking to my niche.
I think that's a hard thing too, because when you first get into it, you're like, I just got to get whatever I can get my
Yeah.
hands on. And then as you kind of, I feel like, mature with your collection, you kind of, fine tune what it is that you're looking for, what it is that you're really collecting, and why. And I think usually once you figure that out, your collection kind of changes and you slow down. And most of the time, it's because the products that you're trying to now go after are a little bit on the pricier side and they're not $10 Funko Pops anymore,
No.
but it's there's a maturity phase, I think, because I when I first started I was like, I just got to get whatever I can get my hands on. Like, I just want all the Funko Pops, I want all the Legos. And
Yeah.
now I kind of am like, I kind of just want to collect certain things that really have meaning to me. I don't
Yeah.
think I need just everything that comes out anymore.
Yeah.
And kind of seems like that's a trend. A lot of people have, once you kind of get to a point, you're like, all right, I'm running out of space. Like, what is it
Mhm.
that I'm really trying to do here? What is it that, why am I collecting? What's the reason? What do I want to have? And usually that is kind of a turning point for a lot of people in their collections.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And even now, like I'm at a point where I'm just like, oh man, I'm actually I convinced my wife to let me basically remodel the whole garage and let me do my collection over there. So I'm working on that currently. So it's definitely going to be a bigger space. But even then, as I'm starting to, as I'm building it out, I'm already starting to like visualize, okay, like I'm not going to put everything up anymore. Like there's going to be certain sections for certain things, and it's going to be a lot more curated than before. So,
Interesting. I'll be excited to kind of see how that turns out when you finish it.
thank you. Yeah.
And then you've got I think the only other person I've seen with that chair is Eben.
Evan. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that is the infamous Emperor's chair. And that is such a cool chair. I love
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. Well, interesting fact, I was the first to get that chair. Like, yeah. And
Wow.
if you go on Regal Robots website, you actually see my chair and my, the pictures of my collection room in that chair. But yeah, I confirmed with Tom Spina. I was like, "Hey Tom, like I ordered that like literally like right when it released. Like it was like I forgot what time it was, like 9 a.m. or something. And as soon as it did that, I was like, click, 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 boom, ordered it. And he confirmed that that was kind of the first one out. And yeah, it's such a cool chair. Obviously, for years I used it for like my podcast and collection wars, and whenever I did interviews, I'd usually be sitting in there. But again, unfortunately, because of like space wise, once I started getting some of these bigger pieces,
Mhm.
I was like, well, I got to sacrifice something. So the chair ended up getting sacrificed, and then, but it will return. It will
Okay.
return in the new space. So keep an eye out for that.
Cool. And then I feel like another big piece I've noticed, and now a few pictures, is
Mhm.
your Han and Carbonite.
Yeah.
Is that just like hung up on the wall? What really is that? Because I've seen a few people, they like 3D print it out and stuff,
Yeah.
and then it's there. But
Yeah.
how is yours? What is your Han Solo and Carbonite?
Yeah. No, that's a great question. So I think, let me see if the one in that picture, I think no, I think that might already be the elusive concepts one. But so in all my early videos, if you on my YouTube, um, I've had the Han Solo and Carbonite, and I actually built them myself. On the RPF, there's a lot of builders out there that give you the resources, tell you the paint, what to use for the carbonite stuff. There's one guy who sells a mold of like the Han Solo that's actually taken from the elusive concept one. Another guy who sells the frame. So you kind of sit there, and it's a long process. But the one that you see in a lot of my videos, I made myself. And the reason why I did that is because the one I currently have is super hard to find. It's actually made by a company called Elusive Concepts. And Elusive Concepts was a company in the 90s that sold their stuff through Sharper Image. And Sharper Image and those catalogs that you'd get on the airplane back in the day, the like the air stores or whatever, you could order it through them. Well, they actually went into the Lucasfilm archives, and they actually they made a mold of the original one. And that's how they made the replica. And then they made a mold of the second panel. And then they just made 8 of them to put on the side. But the reason why that one's super hard to get is because number one, it's like really the only one that's directly from the Han Solo and Carbonite in the archives. Obviously, it's a licensed replica, from they had the license from Lucasfilm to go in there, but they're also very fragile. So it's fiberglass, and a lot of the times the fiberglass will chip. The fingers will like snap off, like they'll chip off. So to find one in good condition right off the bat, it's hard. Number two, it's a big piece. And because it's so fragile, it's almost impossible to ship across the country, right? You almost have to freight it. So you have to find one locally, which again narrows down the odds like down to like nothing. But I was fortunate enough that a few years ago I found one locally in good condition, decent price. So I was like, I gotta buy it. So yeah, so the one that I that's currently behind me, actually the one in the picture, is the Elusive Concepts replica that's taken from the mold of the original Han Solo and Carbonite.
Interesting. That is pretty cool. Yeah, I don't think anyone has like one that's actually been like made by someone else. Like most of the time, I feel like people have kind of 3D printed it, then they sand it,
Mm.
paint it, kind of put it up and call it a day. But I've never seen one that's actually modeled off of the one that they used. So
Yeah,
that is pretty
yeah,
cool.
that's the closest you can get to the screen used one because, like I said, they straight up made a mold of the whole front panel. So all the little cracks, everything on there, you could screen match it. You can go into the movie and be like, oh, there's that little crack. There's that little, you know, the famous one is that check mark. You could kind of see, might be able to see it there, but on his right side, there's like a
Hmm.
V shaped little
Oh yeah,
check mark.
under the hand.
And now that you know about that one, watch every time you see a Han Solo and Carbonite, you're gonna look for that little V. But yeah, no, the whole thing, every little. I mean, it's pulled from the original. So
Yeah, and it looks like it's a massive piece. So that
it,
is a very that's like really a showcase piece, I feel like, in your collection.
yeah, no, absolutely. It's the first thing you see when you walk in. And again, because it's life size, it's like 8 feet tall, right? From the bottom
Jeez.
to yeah. So like even
Wow.
when I stand next to it, and sometimes it's hard to show the scale, like especially in my collection, because I'm always doing videos like front facing
Mhm.
and stuff's behind me. But like if like I have a bunch of stuff right here, but if I were to stand next to it, my head is around where his fingers are. So like
Wow.
that's how tall he is. Um, like if I were to stand like in that picture, my forehead lines up to probably the plaque, the Darth Vader plaque right there. That's probably where my forehead,
Interesting.
is right there in relation. So
That like totally blows the scale up for sure.
yeah,
That's crazy.
yeah, yeah. No, they're.
Dang.
I mean, yeah. I mean, think about the Darth Vader helmet. I mean, that alone. I mean, David Prowse is a big guy. So even the helmet itself is massive. That's why it's actually to the side because it won't fit straight forward in the Bestas. So
Interesting.
so yeah, no, it's they're big helmets. And yeah, the Han Solo one especially. Um it's like one of those things you have to see in person to like appreciate the scale.
Yeah, I could only imagine walking in and seeing like an 8 foot Han Solo in carbonite. That would be crazy. So
Yeah.
that's cool. And then I believe that's also the same art too. And I had a question about it. Does it like move and stuff? Like, is it operationable or is it kind of just for show?
Yeah. So when I was building it, that's one of those like kind of like roads you have to take, right? You got to choose like early on kind of what you want to do. So mine is RC. I decided to do like it drives like I have there's a battery in it, you can charge it, it's remote control. The head also moves, it lights up. The only thing I didn't do because I was just intimidated by it is do all the like door servos,
Mm,
which now it's too late for me to do that because the skins, the front panels are kind of glued in together. So it does operate as far as moves, and but the little doors and stuff like that doesn't move. Yeah, but yeah,
interesting.
the R2 builders go crazy. Some of them go like crazy. Like every single little door has something behind it, and some of them like actually have the little arms that come out. I mean, it's wild what they do.
Yeah, they get. I mean, some of the guys that do that stuff, like, I mean, and they go to, I feel like, a lot of cons and stuff. So they're around, and the stuff that they produce is like so technical. Like,
Okay.
I don't even know where to begin, and but I know they'd be a great resource.
Yeah,
So if I ever did want to build one, I'm sure they would be able to. That community would be able to help. But
yeah,
I know that they get super technical. All the doors open, the head spins, you get the noise, the lights going, it's moving, like it's so like lifelike. It's
yeah.
crazy, but I just from like an electronic standpoint, I'm like, ooh, that's a lot. I don't know that I could do that. So I would probably be in the same boat as you. I'd want it to move, but
Yeah.
I don't know if I could get all the doors and
Mhm.
the audio and the lights and all that to go with it. I think that'd be
Yeah.
a feat in itself. So
Yeah. No, I was super intimidated by it. I still am. Like, I still like every once in a while, I'm like, oh, maybe I should like upgrade this and upgrade that. And I'm like, no, that's too much. Like, I have to like learn like this whole new skill, like with the, programming the servos and all that stuff. I'm like, no, I'm good.
yeah. And then around it, I know that you're big into the Regal Robot stuff.
Yeah.
Are most of those from Regal Robot?
That you see there, yeah. So the life size Salacious, that is Regal Robot. The Rancor puppet above it, that's also Regal Robot. The Rancor was actually digitally scanned from the original puppet from Return of the Jedi. So they went into the archives, they scanned it, and they made 83 of those.
Wow.
So yeah, I was super fortunate to get one. And that's probably one of my favorite pieces. It just look at it like you look at it and it's like, oh my god, yeah, it's the Rancor because it is the Rancor. It's the one you see in Return of the Jedi. And then the R2 is Sideshow Collectibles life size bust. The Greedos is sideshow. Um, what else? The IG88 on top. That one's actually, it's kind of like a found part fan made. But the guy who actually made that for me, or at least the canister, is the one that made the canister for all the Disney parks,
Mm.
for a lot of the Mandalorian shots, for like the cantina that he walks in and it's like EV999. He's a bartender. All those cantina things are there. The Scum and Villainy cantina, I think, used that same mold. So it has a lot of just history behind it because it's been used in so many different places, right? So yeah, so IG88 is a fan made, but also has some connection. And
Hmm.
then CZ3 is also Regal Robot.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Cool. Cool. I like the bus. The bus are pretty cool, but I think the jetpack over there is even cooler.
Yeah, yeah, the jetpack. So that's another one that's it's one of the few kind of fan made ones that I have. But the cool thing about that one, again, there's lineage there, and then the artist that ended up painting it for me painted it with original vintage flow quills, which were the original paints that they used back in the 70s and 80s for all the films that they're using. So I
Wow.
wanted it like basically exactly how you see it in the archives.
Interesting. That is, I mean, if you would have told me it was like a replica, I totally would have
No,
believed you. It
yeah,
looks amazing. Some of the stuff that that are fan made are
no.
honestly next level, and the stuff that they can do is very impressive. So
Oh,
I would have
100.
thought that was like a replica for sure. I would have never guessed that was fan made.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, the casting again, the casting has some lineage, obviously, uh, and it is. I mean, it's a life size replica, right? But yeah, no, the fans do some amazing job now. Especially like you said with the 3D printing. Like as soon as 3D printing became a little more accessible, that just flooded the market and the community with uh, pretty much anything you could dream of. Like somebody out there made it and has the 3D model for it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. It is readily accessible,
Yeah.
but then you got to go through and do all the other technical aspects
Yeah.
to it, like sanding it, priming,
Right.
painting, doing all that stuff. But some of the guys, like I know Rex from Millennium Workshops,
Yeah.
he does like such great tutorials about how to like do all that kind of stuff. Like
Yeah.
once you get your printer, how to set it up, do
Mhm.
this. So it's I think having 3D printers has really kind of changed the game when it comes to creating props, upgrading your cosplay, upgrading your
Yeah.
collection room,
Yeah.
like just really whatever you need.
Yeah.
It's there and it's at your fingertips if you can print it. And I'm sure if you can't design it, someone else probably already has.
Right.
So, and you
Yeah.
just got to get the file.
No, absolutely. And there was a time around when it started becoming really popular where there was this like weird divide between like the officially licensed replicas and the companies versus like 3D print. In fact, you still like I get comments, on YouTube, on pretty much all the platforms where there's always going to be one person or two that are going to be like, oh, I could have printed that. You're like, oh, you paid $1,000, I could have printed that for $100. I'm like, yeah, sure, absolutely. That's great. I could. And most
Yeah.
of this stuff is probably, like you said, readily available online where you can print it and do all that stuff. But again, for me, it's more about that connection to the archives. And if a company was able to go into the archives and scan it and make a mold out of it, that connection, you know it's key for my collection. So the lineage is what I focus on.
Yeah. And I mean, that's a pretty solid one. I think you're the first. I think Eben has a few that are like that, but really the first person that's like had a lot of, the replicas that have been scanned coming from the archives, having that lineage. I think that's a really cool kind of, baseline for your collection. And it's cool that all your pieces kind of have some connection like to the legit props. I think that's pretty cool.
Yeah, and again, it keeps me in check too, right? So it's like, because again, I could easily go and just get everything 3D printed and all of a sudden I have no room. So Uh, I was also very fortunate, though. I will say this is that I started collecting these at a time when the secondary market was not like crazy, right? So like the master replicas right now, like the lightsabers that you see right there next to the jetpack, you know, some of those when I first started collecting, you could get them for $300, $400. Now they're like $2,000, $3,000, right? So I was really fortunate to get into this hobby when it, before it skyrocketed, right? It's like Pokemon collectors, right? If you would have just started collecting them 10 years ago, you could have got pretty much any piece for like nothing, right? But like you said, during 2020, it just shot everything up like crazy prices.
Yeah, the buying after, buying on the aftermarket has definitely become a feat in
Mhm.
itself, unfortunately. Not only first finding something that is a quality product that, you can verify before you purchase,
Yeah.
then, actually finding it at a reasonable price, like it almost becomes a daunting task
Yeah.
these days,
Yeah.
unfortunately.
Yeah.
So,
And again, that's the reason why I started my channels because again, as people are searching for these on eBay, I wanted to give them a place where they could be like, oh, like I'm gonna buy this master replica, I'm gonna spend 3 grand on it. Let me make sure it's legit. Let me make sure and find. So I have this whole tutorial video on there. So I did like a series. It's like collecting Star Wars replicas 101, 102, and 103. And the 101 just explains like, look, there's these companies, and only certain companies are allowed to make these replicas because they have a license from Lucasfilm. And kind of explain that part of it. The second part I go into kind of what to look for when you're looking for these, right? Certain, replicas are going to say something, right? There's usually going to be a stamp somewhere, the certificate of authenticity, right? What to look for, the shipping box, the art box, and all that. So, and then the last one is about displaying the pieces and just kind of how different people display stuff, which again, what led to our kind of collecting podcast, which was Collection Wars. We wanted to showcase kind of how people displayed their collections, and we try to focus on like just like high end collections, right? Like people that have like great, I mean, way bigger than mine, and just cooler than mine. So we wanted to focus on that and just inspire people to be like, oh look, it's about how you display them as well, right? Like you don't have to have super expensive pieces to make them look nice as long as you give it the respect that it deserves. Yeah.
yep, I say that. I mean, that's kind of why I started this podcast, is because I love seeing other people's collections and what interests them, why they collect what they collect, how they display it, how they go about it. But I always say there's two parts to collecting. There's actually going on the hunt, getting the product, trying to wait it out, find a good price, find a good quality. But then there's once you get it and you have it in your collection, how do you display it? How can you elevate it? Do you add lights? What shelves do you use? Do you use certain stands? What do you do? Like I feel like there's such a craft behind it. Like yeah, you could just stick it up on the shelf and call it a day and it's still a cool piece, but you could put it in a case, you could add some lights, like you can do all this stuff to just elevate your pieces, and I think there's such a craft behind that. So I always say there's two different parts to collecting, and I love interviewing people who have kind of done both.
No.
Like it's cool to see.
Yeah. No, I agree. And a big part of it too came from even just like my, you know, growing up, right? Like I never, I lived with a lot of brothers and sisters, and I never had my own room. And like my mom would let me display some of my figures like in the living room sometimes. Like she just like let me put, so I always had that in mind. Like I have to make them look good because people are gonna see these, like that are gonna come into our living room and see my little Star Wars figures. So I want to like display them nicely. And I think that's part of that just subconsciously kind of spilled into my room, right?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it makes sense. Sometimes if you're buying and putting a lot of time into the things that you're collecting, I feel like you'd want them to look nice, and you want to have a good place that you can kind of go and sit and admire your collection. And if I had your collection room, I probably would never leave. I would probably just sit in there all day and just do all the things and look around. Like,
Yeah.
there's just so much to your collection. It's
Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah, that's why that emperor chair was like, it was good but also bad, because yeah, I would come in here and sit here and I would just like, even if I was just going to be on my phone and just like looking through social media, I would just come in here and just be like do like on my chair. And my wife and kids are like, oh, dad's in the collection room. At least now there's no seat in there, so it kind of forces me to be like in the living room or like other places in the house.
Gotcha. Yeah, I mean, listen, the Emperor chair will make its return at some
It
point,
will.
as you said.
It
So,
will.
and then I believe these are the last two pictures
Yeah.
that you sent me. So, what exactly are these? I feel like recently you've picked up quite a lot of them, like, and it's been accumulating, but I don't know too
Yeah.
much about these pieces.
Yeah, so that's kind of like, as a collector, you always kind of categorize different, collectibles and things like that. So I got like my weapons, like my lightsabers, blasters, got my helmets off to the side, got some studio skill stuff. But this is kind of my most recent kind of addiction, and it's the maquettes, the concept maquettes. So basically, well, some of those are the chess pieces, so they technically don't qualify as that, but a lot of those are the maquettes. And this is an older picture. There's much more now, but there's basically that company Regal Robot, and they have access to the Lucasfilm archives because they have a license from Lucasfilm, and they go into the Lucasfilm archives and they've been digitally scanning these concept maquettes. Basically, the concept maquettes for Return of the Jedi, these artists made, I mean, I think probably maybe about 100. I forgot. Tom says the exact number, but there's a whole table just full of them. And basically, George Lucas would walk in and be like, I like that one. I like that one. Yeah, let's make this one into this. So these are the ones that basically the artists were conceptualizing for George Lucas to pick from. And obviously, as you can see, a lot of these did make it onto into the movie, but there's also a ton of them that didn't make it into the movie. But the reason I love this so much, this collection, is because growing up, there was a movie called From Star Wars to Jedi, and it was like one of these documentaries, right, of like how they made Star Wars all the way to Return of the Jedi, and it was like all the background stuff, all the ILM and all the artists kind of working in the backgrounds on how to do it. And I probably watched that movie more than the original trilogy. I would sit there and just watch that one over and over again. And there's a shot where they're panning that table with all the maquettes, and they're talking about the maquettes. And it's Mark Hamill's actually the narrator. And they talk about Jabba. Yeah, they're like, he's like, Jabba was the hardest one. The first one was too lifelike. The next one was too slug-like. The final one is just right. But again, there's a lot of different versions of some of these characters that we love. And it's cool that Regal Robot is kind of going into the archives and focusing on these, because again, for me, it hits two kind of nails, right? First one, there's lineage, right? They're actually going to the archives and digitally scanning the originals. But two, these are so nostalgic to me because of that film, because of that documentary. Just again, remembering them showing some of these maquettes, I'm just like, man, I just absolutely love them. But they are hard to display because there's so many of them. So in the new room, there's going to be this section specifically for, and I'm already like planning ahead to like complete the set. So like it's going to be a massive space just for the maquettes. But yeah, so that's what this picture is. The one on the left, right, the green guy, the slug, that's the Dagobah slug that you see at Galaxy's Edge. So anybody that has gone to Galaxy's Edge, if you go to Oga's Cantina, behind the beer tabs, there's two of these. One, they're hanging upside down in this like green tub, and there's one on each side of the bar. So basically, there's five of these in existence. There's two in Anaheim, there's two in Florida, and then there's this one. And yeah, that because one of and you might know him if you're if you're friends with like the Spice Runners. But yeah, Jason. worked on these for Galaxy's Edge, and he had his original casting of it. He ended up painting it for me and all that, and I was lucky enough to get it into my collection. And again, there's that connection there too, because again, it's from the original molds that they use for the Disney parks, and then there's there's some history behind it because Ralph McQuarrie actually designed that slug, and there was a concept one that didn't make it into Empire Strikes Back. So it's kind of cool that Disney used that for for the parks.
Interesting. Next time I go to Oga's, I mean, I feel like Oga's is so busy with all the stuff that they have going on, so I've never noticed them, but now next time I go, I'm gonna like specifically look for that because I've never picked up on that. There's always like so much to see and look around, and like, I'm just fascinated with the things
Yeah,
that they, like having the heads as like the taps and things like that, but I've
yeah,
never noticed the slug. So
yeah,
next time I go, I'm going to be on the
yeah.
lookout for that.
It's hanging upside down, so
Okay.
just how you see it like that, but
They have them
upside
upside
down.
down. Got it.
Mhm.
Okay. Okay. I'll keep an eye out for sure.
Yeah,
But those were all the pictures that you sent me, and I do
yeah,
have two final questions
yes.
before we wrap up. The second to last is, what is your favorite piece in your collection?
Ooh, yeah. Um, Again, I would say the Raincore, and I should have sent you a picture of the Raincore. I'll send you one if you want to plug it in. But
Sure.
yeah, the Raincore puppet from Regal Robot. Again, that thing is just absolutely just mind blowing when you see it, because again, it's the Raincore. Like, there obviously there's been other ones, like Sideshow created one that they kind of did it on their own. Obviously there's the Kenner one and things like that. But that one, because it's scanned from the puppet, it's like the Raincore from the movie, right? So you're like, you see it and it just looks so menacing, so cool. Yeah, I'd probably say that's my favorite. That's the one question a lot of people ask, like, there was a fire, like, what would you grab?
You have. Yep.
Probably would be that one, just because I'd be able to actually pick it up, and it's massive, it's huge, but yeah,
Yeah.
that's probably my favorite.
I think PJ had one, or possibly, and it was like pretty massive in the picture that he sent me, and I was
PJ might
like,
have had both at one point. I don't know if he
I
still
think
does.
he did have both.
Yeah, PJ had the sideshow
Yeah.
one. I remember that, and then I'm pretty sure he got the Regal Robot one. Yeah, PJ was actually another one. So when I was mentioning those channels, the collecting group channels and those little communities, yeah, PJ's channel was also one of those communities. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, the last question I have before we wrap up is, since this is a collecting podcast, if you could offer one piece of advice to other collectors out there, what would it be?
Yeah. Focus on what you love, right? Again, I know because I'm a collector myself. Again, it could get out of hand, especially in the Star Wars world. Like, there's just so much stuff to collect. I would say, kind of stick to a genre of collectibles. Try to focus on that. And then the second thing is just show them love by displaying them nicely, right? Showcase them, like really enjoy them. The collectors that buy stuff just to keep in the box and they just kind of get stored away, even if it's a figure, like it's such a shame because you bought it for a reason. There's some connection, and it's like, why not just display it? That way you can look at it, enjoy it. Um, and if you can, share it, right? Like share it with other collectors, inspire them. So I guess those would be my three takeaways.
Okay. Well, those are some good pieces of advice. And um, that was pretty much all that I had. Is there anything else you wanted to kind of throw in there quickly? Or we can wrap it up. You could let people know where they can find you, kind of anything that you have upcoming that you'd want them to be on the lookout for, things like that.
Yeah. No, I mean, yeah, if people want to follow my channels, again, I just changed my handle on TikTok and Instagram from Star Wars Replicas to Gabe's Empire. But on Facebook and on YouTube, I'm still Star Wars Replicas, and I don't intend on changing those. So those are there. So yeah, follow along. I'm fortunate enough to get sometimes some sneak peeks of things that are coming out. And yeah, if you enjoy that type of content, I've been trying to do a little more like park content and like just a little bit, obviously conventions. Um, I do content around that. So yeah, if you want to follow along, you're welcome.
Okay. Well, I will put all of your information down in the description. So, guys, please go check him out and give him a follow if you aren't already following him. And I really appreciate you coming on and doing this. I think it was a great conversation. I love your collection. So, thank you again for coming on.
Oh, thank you for the invite. Appreciate it.
Okay. Well, I will see everybody in the next episode then. Bye, guys.